Alright guys, this is it, the much awaited Necro video. It's not a surprise to many people that are aware of what's good in the open world that I have chosen Power Reaper for this video. Power Reaper, especially after the most recent balance patch, which gave it about a 5% DPS buff, is a very capable choice to play in the open world. The reason why Power Reaper is so good is because it is capable of getting to 100% crit chance without help from anyone else, and without and being able to self buff with might and a little bit of quickness and Vuln on its own. Additionally, the rotation is pretty fluid, loops very well, and the skills are high impact, so it's fun to play. And what you find is that it's just a very capable build. It's tanky, it's survivable, it's very thematic to play, and you get very big numbers on your screen, which is fun. And to top it all off, it's actually very powerful. So I do highly recommend this build. I see a lot of people, and I don't know exactly what they're doing because they're playing Reaper at these open world events, but they're not doing very competitive DPS. And if you play the build, even if all you did was camp Greatsword and go into Death Shroud, if you didn't bother with the axe aspect of the rotation, you could still do very respectable DPS. So when I see Reapers not doing very good DPS, I really don't quite understand what they're doing. So hopefully any of the Reaper players that are confused about what they should be doing will find this guide somewhat useful. I will say that this build is basically a copy-paste of the meta Reaper raid build, and as a result, it shouldn't be completely surprising or off the wall for anyone to recognize any of these choices, and I'm not really making a claim for originality, but anyway, enjoy. Alright guys, the gear for the Power Reaper is very straightforward. You just want to run full Berserker on everything with Rune of the Scholar, and then on your Greatsword, Impact and Force, and then you're going to want an Axe and Warhorn, also with Impact and Force. The gear, again, super easy. It's full Berserker. There is a little bit of overcapping with your crit chance at times, with the way the traits work out. So in theory, you could min-max and replace some of your Berserker gear with Valkyrie. I don't recommend that for a lot of reasons, especially in places where you're down-leveled and you lose a bit of crit chance. But overall, super easy to gear, and interestingly enough, the build, since it overcaps a little bit on crit chance with full Ascended, that you can run this build very effectively even with exotic gear because of the extra crit chance, and the exotic gear will still get you to 100% crit chance, so it's really good. But yeah, there's not a lot to say about the gear. You just want to go full Berserker in every slot with Scholar Runes and Force and Impact. Very vanilla gearing, but it is what it is. Alright, so let's talk traits. The traits that we're going to take are the same, pretty much the exact same as you would see in the raid build. Spite, Soul Reaping, and Reaper. In Spite, we take Spiteful Talisman because it's a DPS increase, Awaken the Pain because it's a DPS increase, and Close to Death because it's a DPS increase. In Soul Reaping, we take Unyielding Blast. There's not really a particularly desirable trait here, but Unyielding Blast is basically the best you can get. And you do find one of the strengths of this build is that it's very self-supporting in that it makes a lot of crit chance, so it doesn't need other people to buff its crit chance, and it makes a lot of Vuln and a lot of might. So again, as we've mentioned, the build is very self-sufficient, and this is one of those traits that make it so that when you're operating alone or in a very small group, you'll be able to make sure that you are covered. Soul Barbs is a 10% damage increase when entering or exiting Shroud, which is very key, and we'll talk about how that works in the rotation when we get to that, but it's a very important trait. And then Death Perception is a 33% crit chance increase while in Shroud, which ensures that when we're in Death Shroud, we are always going to crit. And then Reaper, we will take Chilling Nova. It's a slight DPS increase, pretty good trait. Decimate defenses. This works out to be, in most cases, a very big... in most cases in the open world, especially at meta events, you're going to have 25 stacks of Vuln, no questions asked, so a 50% crit chance boost, which is really over the top strong. And then Reaper's Onslaught is our Grandmaster choice, and this again very strong in the open world because rotationally you're going to be going into Reaper Shroud early and doing a lot of auto attacks when you're doing that, and self-buffing yourself with quickness is pretty strong. The reason why it's so good is sometimes when you're at meta events, you're not going to get the most consistent quickness from Chronos, but you are very likely to get a Signet of Inspiration proc here or there, or a boon extension from an Ellie, or probably even a boon extension from a Herald, and all of these things together, plus the little bit amounts of quickness you're going to get, this will ensure that even if you don't have perfect buffs from a nearby Chrono or Firebrand, that you'll be a bit more covered and a bit higher percentage of quickness uptime than everybody around you. And it kind of goes with the whole theme of this build as being a bit more self-sufficient than some of the other builds. This build can make a bit of might. It makes all its own crit chance, and it can make even a bit of vuln and even a little bit of its own quickness. So you're not as reliant as the people around you, and that's what really makes it so good in the open world. Now, as far as the skills we take on our bar, your heal skill is completely optional. I could see a good argument for everything from Well of Blood. In raids, people go with the Blood Fiend just because it's a very slight DPS increase because the Blood Fiend attacks. I personally prefer Your Soul Is Mine. It also, when you use it, it adds damage, but it also helps you with life force, and it gets better the more targets that are around you. I personally think it's the preferable choice for most occasions, but tons of options here, and even Consume Conditions has places where you want to use it. Your heal skill, totally up to you. I don't think that there's one size fits all answer there. Signet of Spite, 180 power. You can't really argue with that, so we always take that. Well of Suffering is a pretty high DPS skill, and since it pulses over time, it allows us to really layer our damage, which we like. And then I'm going to suggest in this slot Summon Shadow Fiend because it is the highest single target DPS option if you use Haunt on cooldown. However, I would say that this slot is totally optional. If you're looking for just most burst damage at the start of a fight, I would point you to Well of Corruption, because when you drop both wells together, you can really layer a lot of damage early on in the fight. But this, again, Necro has a lot of utility, and this slot isn't so strong that it can't be used for something else. If you're one of these guys that really wants to solo open world and need to shut down big groups of, say, veteran or elite mobs, maybe you want to go with Well of Darkness, which will allow you to just really be invulnerable to big groups of mobs while you mow them down. And then the elite is Summon Flesh Golem. There really isn't a satisfying elite choice for Power Reaper. None of these are particularly good for Power Reaper. And so really the default is going to be Flesh Golem. One last thing I would say is this is a power build. However, there are places and times where you want to use Epidemic. There are a lot of events in the open world where there's tons of mobs. The Istan, Palawadon meta, Thunderhead Keep, lots of meta events are not just single target things. They are tons of groups of trash mobs. In situations like that, even though we're not a Condi build, you can use Epidemic to essentially cleave targets. You pick out the champion mob in the group of trash mobs, epi him, and then essentially you get to tag all the other trash mobs around him, and it'll work out pretty well for you. So again, this optional slot can be a lot of different things, but these are the traits and these are the general skills that I will recommend. So with that said, we will get into the rotation. All right, so the Power Reaper rotation has a couple things that you want to pay attention to. The first is that you gain a lot of differences once the boss hits 50%, so you want to always be paying attention to what percentage the enemy is at. Additionally, you want to make sure you maximize your buff for entering or exiting Shroud, and you'll see how we work that here. So we're going to lead off with using our Shadow Fiend skill and then our Well, and then I will go Greatsword 3, Greatsword 4, Greatsword 5, and then we're going to swap to our Axe set and use Warhorn 5 for Locust, and then we will go into Ghastly Claws, Axe 2, and then into Shroud and use Shroud 4, where we spin in our field, and then we're just going to auto attack with Reaper Shroud. And one thing you'll want to pay attention to is the little buff in your buff bar that's giving you the % damage modifier for being in Shroud. Once that expires, there's really not a great need to stay in Reaper Shroud. You gain more by exiting at that point. And again, I would like to add that this is not like the min-max raid rotation. This is a rotation that's very easy to follow in open world, and much more user-friendly. So then we exit when that buff runs out, and then we do another Ghastly Claws, and then we're going to swap to Greatsword. Greatsword 3 will be up, and then we're going to do an auto chain here. And then when the auto chain is finished, we use Greatsword 4 and 5. Interestingly, at this point, the boss is at 50% HP. So guess what? We can go into Gravedigger spam. Once the boss hits 50% HP, for the most part in open world, things are going to die very quickly at that point, and you can get away with just spamming Gravedigger. If you are on a fight that's taking a little bit longer than this, where the HP is a lot higher, perhaps you're at an Octovine where people aren't burning it very fast, at this point you might want to go into Reaper Shroud to get that 10% buff back and do your Reaper Shroud burst and then exit and then go back into Gravedigger spam so that your Gravediggers are hitting 10% harder. But when the boss is dying this quick, really the best thing you can do is be doing the Gravedigger spam. But really, that's basically it. That's all you really need to know about the build. The rotation's super easy to follow, and I'm sure some Necromains have some even more tips and things to keep track of that they will add in the comments below. So if you are curious, check those out. All right, guys, so last thing I wanted to touch on is the food. Obviously, best in slot food for this build is going to be bowl of sweet and spicy butternut squash soup, and the potent superior sharpening stones. So a lot of you probably are on a bit of a budget and you don't want to blow sweet and spicy butternut squash soup on open world events, and I totally get that. So the second best thing you could probably run is the avocado smoothies, since it gives you 140 relevant stats. If you're on a super budget, what you can do, since you don't need crit chance, is there we go. The plate of Orion steak frites, which gives you 100 power, which is good, and it gives you vitality. Since we don't really need crit chance from the secondary stat, the vitality is just a little boost, and that is a very budget-friendly option. So yeah, those are the foods that I'm going to recommend that you guys use for this build. So anyway, guys, that is it for the Power Reaper. I know this is not the most outside-the-box choice, since it's basically the raid / fractal build that everyone knows and loves, but there really isn't a lot of good options to change from the raid build. There's definitely a couple of trait choices that you could change depending on the scenario that you find yourself in, but I find that for the most part, especially since I'm mostly focusing on meta events and less on solo roaming, that the choices are going to be very similar to the raid comp. But I know there's a lot of Necro fans out there, and I know that Necro gets a lot of hate in the community, and I also know that there's a lot of people that want to play Necro. So let me make it perfectly clear, again, that this is an excellent build, and if you play it well, you should have no trouble getting near the top or top DPS in meta events when you use it. This build is fantastic and has a lot of self-sufficiency and self-sustain, and it does everything that you want it to do, and it feels powerful when you use it, which is very important. It's very on theme. If you're into a little bit of the roleplay aspect, it does what it feels like it should do. And there's no reason why you can't have a ton of fun playing this. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is the 9th build that we've done so far in this series, and now every profession's covered. I do have one more build that's sort of a wild card that I wanted to go over, and we're going to do that in the next video. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. Thanks.